dressed in fatigues, holding a phone instead of a gun. "You see what you did?" he said. "You see them now?" Joe looked down. His boots were covered in blood. He woke up gasping, the sheets twisted, soaked with sweat. Clock read 3:42 a.m. Mary wasn't beside him. He staggered to the kitchen. Another envelope sat on the table. No name, no stamp, no address. Just waiting. The second photo was closer. He could see the building, the one from the left flank, where they'd thrown the grenades in blind. Inside, bodies, a child in a white shirt, eyes open, mouth open. The handwriting was the same. She was 7. You never checked. Joe's knees gave out. He fell into the chair, hands shaking. The hallway light flicked. "On Mary, Joe." He covered the photo quickly. She walked toward him. "What are you hiding?" "Nothing. Don't lie. I said it's nothing." She froze, her eyes wide. It was the first time he'd raised his voice in 20 years. She turned away, left. Without a word, Joe sat alone in the dark and cried. The third letter came with no photo, just a single sheet of paper. Typed. You remember Hugh, don't you? House 47, West Alley, Feb 14. You said, "Clear it." And someone did. You never looked. You never checked. You just moved on. Now it's your turn. Joe didn't eat that day. He didn't shave. He walked out to the garage and stood in front of the old Foot Locker. His name was still stenciled across the top in faded black paint. J. Linder. USMC. She stared at it for a long time. Then, with trembling fingers, unlocked it. Inside, medals. A Zippo lighter, combat boots, a green notebook. He picked it up, flipped to the middle. There, in his handwriting, barely legible, 47. Screamed, didn't stop, no weapons, burned. He dropped it like it was hot, staggered backward, clutched. The workbench. I didn't write that. I don't remember writing that, but it was his pen. His words, his guilt. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the fog crawl across the lawn. At dawn, a voice came from behind him. "Dad?" It was David. Joe turned slowly, his eyes bloodshot. David frowned. "You okay?" Joe just stared. "You've been getting letters, haven't you?" Joe's throat dried. "What?" David sat next to him. "I know what's in them." Joe's heart stopped. David looked away. "I found the notebook years ago. I read everything." Joe whispered. "You sent the letters?" David didn't answer, only said, "You survived, but part of you never came home. I didn't mean for them to die." Joe's voice was low, almost inaudible against the morning wind. David didn't turn his head, but they did. They sat side by side on the porch steps, dew still clinging to the grass, the fog lifting slow, like regret. Joe stared out at nothing. "You read the journal?" David nodded. "Years ago. You kept it under the flag." "I thought I burned that." "You didn't." Joe rubbed his hands together. "You were 14. What did you think it meant?" "I thought you were a monster," David said. His voice didn't shake. It was surgical. Joe flinched. David added, "But then I read more, and I realized you were just a soldier." Joe whispered, "Same thing." Silence. Finally, David asked, "Tell me about House 47. Joe shut his eyes. "You. February 14th, 1968. The city smelled like ash and shit. Every wall was a guess. Every shadow a gun barrel. House 47's next," someone barked. "Stack left, clear on my mark." Joe didn't question, he just nodded. 3 bodies moved up the alley. Himself, Mitch, and Sorensen. Kids crying somewhere distant. Crackle of gunfire 2 blocks over. A radio squawked. Static. Joe raised a fist. Mitch pulled the pin. Sorensen kicked the door. Flash. Boom. Screaming. Joe ran in second. Smoke. Inside. Nothing but dust and movement. A woman screamed. Joe raised his rifle, then stopped. She was unarmed, her eyes wide, holding a child. Too late. Mitch fired. Joe shouted, "Hold fire! Hold!" Another burst. A girl collapsed. Then a boy. Then silence. Joe lowered his rifle. Sorensen looked at him. Orders were clear. Joe couldn't speak. He turned and walked out, left them there, in pieces. Back on the porch, Joe whispered, "I never told anyone." David's eyes narrowed. Why? Because they wouldn't believe me. I would have. No, Joe said. You would have hated me. David was quiet. Then, I did. Joe's breath hitched. David continued, I thought the war was what broke you. Now I know it was silence. Joe shook his head. You don't understand. After that day, I shut down. I stopped talking. I stopped feeling. They gave me a medal 2 weeks later for leading that mission. David stood. And you took it. I didn't know how to say no, Joe said. I didn't know how to tell the truth without destroying myself. David turned back. So, you let it destroy us instead? Joe had no reply. Later that evening, Mary found Joe sitting alone in the den. You didn't come to lunch, she said. Joe didn't move. She approached slowly, set a cup of tea beside him. He told me everything, she said. David. Joe's fingers twitched. And? I'm not surprised. He looked up. Mary's face was calm, but her eyes were wet. You stopped holding me after the war. You stopped holding him. Something in you went somewhere and never came back. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself. Joe looked down at his hands. He hates me. Mary shook her head. No, he's hurt. And hurting people try to find explanations. Joe whispered, I don't deserve either of you. Then earn it. He blinked. How? Start by telling the world what you told him. Joe looked at her, searching, pleading. Mary said softly, You survived. But now it's time to live. The attic was hot, claustrophobic. Dust shimmered in the shaft of light from the window. David stood bent under the slanted ceiling, holding a cardboard box. He set it on the old workbench, peeled the tape back. Inside, photos, cassette tapes, 2 worn notebooks, a Purple Heart, and a CD labeled 47, Do Not Duplicate. He stared. At it, Joe's voice came from the doorway. That was my insurance. David didn't turn. Insurance against what? Memory, Joe said. Some part of me always knew I'd forget what mattered and remember what didn't. David picked up the CD. Why keep it? Joe stepped inside. So I'd never lie to myself completely. David held up the journal. I sent this to a reporter last week, someone I trust. Joe flinched. I didn't name names. Not yet. But if she publishes, it won't be private anymore. Joe sat on an overturned crate. She's going to think I'm a war criminal. David turned slowly. You think you're not? Silence. Joe closed his eyes. That's the part I can't answer. David's voice softened. You made me believe you were a hero. For 30 years, I wanted to be you. Joe met his eyes. I didn't want a son who carried my sins. David pointed to the tapes. Then don't let them bury them again. That night, Joe couldn't sleep. He walked outside into the backyard, barefoot in the cool grass. The moon hung low, hazy behind clouds. He looked up. I remember the screams, he said aloud. No one answered. I remember the smell of her hair, smoke and shampoo. I remember the child's foot. I remember not looking at their faces when we left. Still no answer. I don't know if I can be forgiven, he whispered. Then, behind him, you can't. But that's not the point. It was David, holding a flash drive. She sent a draft. The article drops tomorrow. Joe inhaled sharply. "You have one choice left," David said. "Tell your version, or let others tell it for you." Joe reached for the flash drive. His hand trembled, then stilled. Next morning, Joe sat in front of his old laptop, screen flickering. The webcam was on. He leaned in, pressed record. "My name is Joseph Linder. I was a corporal in the U.S. Marine Corps. I served in Hue, Vietnam. In February of 1968, he paused, swallowed. I gave an order. House 47. I believed it was occupied by enemy soldiers. It wasn't. A long silence. I told myself for years it was confusion, fog of war. But the truth is, I was afraid, and fear made me quick enough to kill people I never saw clearly. His breath hitched. I'm sorry to them, to my son, to every veteran who carried weight that wasn't theirs. I carried mine too late, but I'm carrying it now." He reached to stop the recording, then added, "Ox was full again. Letters, threats, some support, but one envelope was different. No return address. Inside, another photo, a woman, middle-aged, smiling, holding a newspaper with Joe's face on it. In the background, a burned-down village. Handwritten. Note, she remembers you, too. Her name is Min." Joe staggered. Mary caught him as he fell into the chair. David picked up the photo. "Who is she?" Joe swallowed hard. "I don't know, but I think I will." That night, David opened a new browser window, typed, "Min, Hugh survivor, Vietnam." Nothing obvious. Then, a forum, survivor testimonies. One user active under the name Phoenix Child. He clicked. A comment. "He wore a cross. He cried after the fire. I was hiding. I never forgot." David stared at the screen. Joe entered the room. "Did you find her?" David nodded slowly. "She's alive," Joe whispered. "Then maybe I can say it to her face." The flight to San Jose was quiet. David sat beside Joe, headphones in. Joe stared out the window, fingers tight around the seat armrest. He hadn't flown in 10 years. He hadn't breathed in 50. They landed in rain, California gray. A car was waiting, rented by the news outlet that ran the story. The reporter had made contact with Min through an interpreter. "She agreed to meet," David said. "She speaks English. Said she's waited a long time." Joe's palms were sweating. The house was modest, clean. A porch swing creaked in the wind, a flower bed lined with Vietnamese lilies. Min opened the door before they knocked. She was small, calm, mid-50s. Her eyes had the kind of stillness that comes only after surviving something that doesn't end. "Joseph Linder?" she asked. He nodded. "I remember your face." He nearly collapsed. Min led them inside. Tea was already brewing. A fan whirred in the corner. "You were the one who cried," she said. Joe looked up. In the smoke. "I saw you. Kneel by the boy. You took his hand. You whispered something." Joe shook. "I don't remember that, but I do." Min placed a photo on the table. The boy, 8, lifeless. A woman beside him, blood pooling from her back. "That was my brother. And my mother." Joe's voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Min nodded. "I know. But there's something else." David watched, frozen. Min pulled out another photo. Joe went pale. It was House 47, before peaceful. A family outside, washing hanging, children laughing. And in the corner, barely visible, a man with a camera. David leaned in. "Wait. That's not you." Joe's eyes locked on the man, and everything came flooding back. Hugh. February 14th, 1968, 1 hour earlier. Joe wasn't leading that mission. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He'd been separated, radio broken, shell-shocked. He saw the smoke from a distance, ran toward it. By the time he got there, House 47 was already burning. The soldiers exiting weren't his unit. They were black ops, no insignia, He stepped inside, choking on ash. Bodies everywhere. One child still breathing. He knelt, took the boy's hand, whispered, "I'm sorry." A camera clicked behind him. A man stepped forward. "No one will believe you anyway." Joe looked up. It wasn't Mitch. It wasn't Sorensen. It was Reese. Back in Min's kitchen, Joe whispered, "Reese." David frowned. "Who?" Joe stood, pacing. He was attached to intelligence, never wore a patch, gave orders when no one else did. Min nodded slowly. "He told me to lie." Joe turned. Min said, "He found me later, in the refugee camp. He said you gave the order. He said you wanted them gone." Joe staggered. Min added, "He filmed me, asked me to say it on tape." David's voice cracked. "Jesus," Joe whispered. "He planted it all, the guilt, the photos." Min stood. "And then he disappeared." David said, "We have to find him." Joe shook his head. "He's been pulling strings for years, letters, photos, maybe even sent the woman's photo. He wanted me broken." Min walked to a drawer, pulled out a cassette tape. "He left this, said someday you'd need it." Joe stared. David inserted it into a small player. Reese's voice, cold, flat, venomous. "You don't get to live without the weight, Linder. You saw the bodies, but I made you feel them. Every letter, every word. I was the trigger. You were the bullet." Silence. Joe fell to his knees. Later, at the hotel, David sat beside him. "You didn't kill them," he said. Joe didn't reply. "But you believed you did." Joe nodded. "And I lived like I had," David whispered. "Then what do we do now?" Joe looked up. "We find Reese, and we make him confess." David stared. Joe's voice was steel. "For them, for her, for me." It took 3 weeks to find him, a P.O. box in Nevada, a burned-out motel room in Arkansas, a bank withdrawal in Baton Rouge. The trail was cold, but not invisible. David traced it all. Joe followed. Reese wasn't hiding. He was waiting. They found him in an abandoned cabin near the Louisiana border. Off-grid, no power, just static radios, hand-drawn maps, and walls lined with black and white photographs. Joe stood in the doorway, David behind him. The smell was mildew and sweat. Reese sat in a chair, facing the door. He was older, gaunt, eyes sunken but sharp. "Been expecting you," he said, voice like rusted wire. Joe stepped inside. "You ruined my life." "No," Reese said. "You never had one," David glared. "You sent the letters, the photos." Reese smiled. "You needed to remember." Joe's fists clenched. "I remembered what you made me believe." Reese leaned forward. "And wasn't it beautiful? The guilt, the nightmares, the shame. You lived again, didn't you?" Joe stared at him. "Why?" Reese's voice dropped. "Because you let me do it." Joe flinched. "In '68, Reese said, you saw me light that match. You saw the mother. You saw the child. And you said nothing." Joe's breath caught. "You didn't give the order, no, but you didn't stop it either." Silence. David whispered, "He was 20. Reese laughed. "So was I." Joe stepped closer. "Why Min? Why send her photo?" Reese's smile faded. "Because she was the last witness, and because you still didn't tell your son the truth." Joe froze. David looked at him. "What's he talking about?" Reese stood, slow and creaking. "Tell him, Joe," Joe whispered. "I thought I forgot." Reese's voice was sharp. "You chose to forget." Joe turned to David. In the fire, in the smoke. Min ran out of the house. David frowned. "And?" "I stopped her. I grabbed her." He swallowed. She was screaming. Blood on her face. I thought she was going for a weapon. I shoved her back inside. David's eyes widened. Joe continued. Then someone threw the last incendiary. House 47 went up. David stepped back. Jesus. Joe dropped to his knees. I pushed her into it, Reese said quietly. And she lived. That's the joke. Joe looked up. No, that's the mercy. He stood, and then punched Reese across the face. Blood. A crack. Reese stumbled, laughing. David grabbed Joe. Let's go. It's over. Joe looked at Reese one last time. You wanted me to be a ghost, but I'm still standing. Reese spat blood. Not for long. 2 weeks later, Joe gave one final interview. National broadcast. No lawyers. No makeup. Just truth. He told the whole story. House 47. Reese, Min himself. Min sent him one letter. 4 words. You pulled me back. That fall, Joe received a package. No. Return address. Inside, a military file. Classified. Marked in red, Operation Phoenix. Unredacted. Joe flipped to the last page. There, under Target Clearance, Civilian Intelligence Assets. Min, Child Informant. Status, Expendable. Joe's knees buckled. David caught him. In the final letter Reese ever sent, one sentence was scrawled in ink. You tried to save her from me, but you were never saving her. You were saving you. Joe looked up at David. Didn't fail her, he said. David nodded. You failed yourself. Joe died 6 months later, peacefully, in his sleep. His last recorded message, played at the funeral. The war didn't kill me. Silence did. But I spoke. I confessed. And now the ghosts are mine to keep. Final scene. David stands at the new memorial, not just for soldiers, but for the civilians of Hugh. He lays down a single photo, his father, smiling. Behind it, a folded paper, a quote. Redemption is not erasing the past. It's choosing to live. With it, he turns to Min, who stands beside him. She nods. He whispers, he remembered.